Yeah, record on this computer. Hi, hello everyone. My second period is here. You want to say hi to them? Well, but I'm recording so they can watch it later. So they'll be watching. I'm talking to them in the future. I'm like Marty McFly and Doc Brown. All right, so today we're going to look at McCulloch versus Maryland, and I'm going to do this as quickly and painlessly as possible. So I'm going to share my screen, which is this one. I'm going to share my sound, and I'm going to optimize. Yeah. Okay. Let's let it catch up from beginning. Work. And it's going to take a minute because my computer is a fabulous piece of equipment. Hey, here we go. So McCulloch versus Maryland. Just so you know, this case is going to come down the hatch in 1819. Okay, 1819. That's one of the first things you should write down. Let's look at a little bit of background, shall we? All right. So 1819 means that we have fought and ended the War of 1812. All right. We did have a first national bank, but then the charter for that national bank expired. And after the War of 1812, around 1816, we decided it might be a good idea to have another national bank because our economic situation was not the best after the war. You see, during the war, there was quite a bit of industrial production in the United States, right? And our industry is still pretty dang young, yes? So a lot of industrial production, quite a bit of demand for products needed due to the war. But after the war, that demand plummeted. And in order to continue getting the prices you once were, you had to overproduce. So people had overextended themselves, overextended their resources, had borrowed money from state banks and local banks. And now those creditors came a knocking. All right. So having a national bank come back again would be helpful for the economic stability of the United States. In fact, guys, this is going to be a part of Henry Clay's American system, right? Protective tariff for industries, increased infrastructure and internal improvements, as well as securing and establishing the second national bank. So legislation creating the second national bank was passed. And it's going to help Congress tax. It's going to help Congress borrow. It's going to help Congress set national interest rates, do all sorts of economic powers that they have. And branches opened all over the United States. And some people said caused some local banks to go into failure, because which one might you regard as more stable as a potential customer? The federal bank or just like a small business bank? The federal, of course. And don't worry, you can participate and speak out loud. It's okay. All right. More Bankground. Just kidding. It's background. You're welcome. All right. So here's the meat and potatoes. Are you ready? Maryland created a tax for all banks not approved by their state assembly. I would write that down. Maryland created a tax, and it was $15,000 back then. You adjust that for inflation, lots of money, lots of money. For all banks not approved by the state legislature. Guess how many banks this affected? One. Maryland approved all of their banks. They did not approve the federal bank. So James McCulloch, I would know who he is because the case is McCulloch versus Maryland. James McCulloch is the national bank branch manager. And he says, no, I'm not going to pay a $15,000 tax. That's stupid. That's ridiculous. Maryland, the federal government told me I can be open. I'm going to listen to the federal government over you. And Maryland said, okay, we're going to sue you. And shocking, in the Maryland state court, Maryland won. So then James McCulloch's next step is to head to the Supreme Court. So on your background, have you written down what Maryland did? Have you written down what McCulloch did? Good, that suffices. Okay. Here's our constitutional question. And I'll give you a minute to write those down while I go get my coffee. Because Monday. You like how I put my gavel on top of the Constitution and took that picture? I did not. The internet is fantastic.
I think we have that in our.
It's not my gavel. It doesn't say Elizabeth Kramer on it. My gavel does say Elizabeth Kramer. College of Education Student Council President. I'm kind of a wig deal. If you were here, you would get that joke. It's a Henry Clay thing. All right. Question 1. Did the Maryland law unconstitutionally interfere with congressional power? In other words, can a state tax an entity of the federal government? Second, did Congress have the authority to establish the bank? All right. So I'm going to pause this because this will be really weird at home. Can I pause recording? I don't know if I can. More? Does it say pause recording? Okay, I'm going to pause it, folks at home. And we're back. We had a very good discussion. If you would like to pause right now and have a discussion with yourself, here's what I think. Well, here's what I think. Be my guest. Or call a friend. That's fun. Oh, would some of you guys actually do that? Okay, next slide. Okay, next slide. There we go. Other constitutional elements I would know if I were you and I were taking down notes to potentially use on an open note quiz. Amendment 10 is involved here, right? And Amendment 10 is what leads us into all sorts of tension between state governments and the federal government. Who has the right to do something? That's where we're going here. And of course, the states' rights argument comes into play here. And guys, the states' right argument is not just the argument that is used by Southern states to advocate for slavery during the Civil War. The states' rights argument comes up time and time again. Texas is using that argument right now with their abortion law. When No Child Left Behind was passed by the federal government, several states sued the federal government for an overreach of federal power. When Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was passed, several states sued the federal government for yet again an overreach of federal power. And it involves a necessary and proper clause, which I'll explain more in a second, and the supremacy clause, which in second period they came up with. So high five, guys. And at home, I hope you thought of it in your little noggin there too. All right, we already did possible, well here, which way do you guys think it's gonna go? Who thinks that McCulloch and the federal government are gonna win this one? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, it's pretty overwhelming here. Anybody think Maryland's got a shot? Poor Maryland. You're correct. So listen, we could go with the decision. SCOTUS could say the bank is unconstitutional. Maryland, you're good. They could also say the bank is constitutional. Maryland, you're in trouble. Sorry if I mixed that up a second ago. So if the bank is not okay, Maryland, you're fine. What you did is okay. If the bank is constitutional, Maryland, No, can't do that. Anybody know who Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is at this time? It's not Earl Warren. It is the one that Jackson challenged. Adams appointed him as a midnight justice. If you're at home watching this, say it out loud, just for S's and G's. Anybody know? John Marshall. Hey, listen, what do we know about John Marshall? He was appointed by John Adams, so he's a Federalist, which means what does he think should happen with the federal government over time? Grow, strengthen, very good. Let's look at our decision. And the Federalists do support the national bank. You're absolutely right, Madeline. All right, so the ruling was unanimous, which makes it 6-0. I know, it's weird, right? Thomas Todd, who is the justice that is kind of whited out there, he was not present. So he was traveling. Kind of think the Supreme Court's kind of an important job. Really, maybe you shouldn't do that, but Okay, I know, quick vacay, pop down to PC. Our guess for you guys, Rosemary. So it's unanimous for McCulloch, which means the second national bank branch or the bank itself is constitutional. Bless you, Owen. Everybody home say, bless you, Owen. Maybe he's sneezing at home whenever you're watching this, whether it be 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 11:59. That would be weird. Also, the Supreme Court ruled that the state of Maryland cannot tax the bank, which, is reflected by that little political cartoon. May I continue? Isn't Maryland shape so funny? Exactly. That's why we want it to stop. Oh, because my face is in the way. Can I move me? Come on, Liz, let's move. Hang on, folks at home. This is so hard to do. All right, there. Can you see Maryland now? Okay. So the reasoning, the constitutionality. I got a couple slides on this. Prepare yourself. One thing that you should write down is the citation of the necessary and proper clause to explain why this is a legitimate institution. Congress is not stepping outside of their powers to create the national bank. So the necessary and proper clause gives Congress implied powers. And it says, word for word, Congress has the power to make all laws which are necessary and proper for carrying out the powers of the Constitution. Now, in this court decision, Marshall is essentially redefining the term necessary to mean whatever is appropriate, whatever is legitimate, which means it's going to be pretty dang hard to rule against Congress if they say they're using the necessary and proper clause to do something. If creating something like a bank helps Congress carry out a power that is expressly stated in the Constitution, they're good to go. And this national bank would help with, look at all of these things, guys: borrowing, taxing, paying debts, regulating currency, which means controlling for inflation, adjusting for interest rates. That's all express power in the Constitution in Article 1 that Congress can do. So having one bank, well, like the institution of the bank with different branches, that totally helps them do their job. So it's legitimate, which is what Marshall said. Okay. So it's a necessary and proper clause that gives Congress the implied power to establish the bank. You have that written down? Good. The next part of this, it was a two-part decision. is that it was an overreach of the state government. Because of, like Alex mentioned, the supremacy clause. And the supremacy clause says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. Judges in every state will be bound thereby, and anything in the Constitution or laws of the United States or of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. So if it's a federal law that's passed, Maryland's got to adhere to it. And them taxing the bank the way that they did, they're trying to interfere with federal law. What's the goal of that tax that they placed on the bank? You had to cripple that bank, right? To economically cripple it and to get the bank to close. It's absolutely right. So a state cannot tax, a state cannot interfere with an entity of the federal government just because they don't like it. This, of course, is going to be brought up time and time again with issues between states and the federal government, time and time again. Do you guys remember the Alien and Sedition Act signed under John Adams's presidency? And remember how the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions advocated for by Madison and Jefferson said that states should nullify federal law they don't agree with? That's an example of one of those tensions. And then we see that same argument again used in 1833 with the nullification crisis. South Carolina doesn't like a tariff. They say, we're leaving the United States. You know who steps in to save the day? Henry Clay. Anyway, I digress. Here's a quote from Marshall. The power to tax is essentially the power to destroy, right? Think about it. If a state reluctantly legalizes marijuana, but they really don't want it to be there, they really don't want people to use it, they can tax the crap out of it, right? You guys ever think that there's situations like that? Yes. Where even though it's legal to do something, there's a lot of loopholes to hop through. If tax is involved, that is akin to the power to destroy. And that's what Marshall says that Maryland was attempting to do. Here's another one. The bill for incorporating the Bank of the United States did not steal upon an unsuspecting legislature and pass unobserved. Guys, the legislature really debated this, right? Its principle was completely understood. It was opposed with equal zeal and ability. After being resisted first in the fair and open field of debate, and afterwards in the executive cabinet, because remember, a bill does not become law until who signs it? The president. Very good. And who does the president have to advise them in economic matters? The cabinet, which cabinet officials specifically? Secretary of Treasury, right? With as much persevering talent as any measure has experienced, and being supported by arguments which convince minds as pure and intelligent as this country can boast, it became law. So y'all, Marshall is saying the legislature, they thought about all of this. They debated the crap out of it. And then the president had his economic advisors to ensure him that it was a good idea. So you tell me, is this a ruling utilizing judicial activism or judicial restraint? Restraint, totally. This is judicial restraint. This is erring on the side of the legislature. Yes. Did they replace an existing law? No. Was there a wrong that was righted? No. Maryland was just told they couldn't, behave like a unhappy child and throw a temper tantrum that cost a lot of money. All right, so then what do you guys think? Is this an originalist interpretation or is this a modernist interpretation? Was the Constitution adapted to fit with a modern situation? Not really. But what about this? Was there a literal interpretation used? Is this ruling evident of strict constructionism, which says just look to the letter of the Constitution, or loose constructionism? What do you think, Madeline? Yes. Yes, because it doesn't say expressly in there they can do it, but it's kind of alluded to. All right. So what's the significance of this case? Well, remember Brutus's warning. The federal government could become more powerful, rendering state governments obsolete or state institutions. For a while, state banks were not seen to have near as much power. And they were not successful as businesses when compared to the National Bank. Although the National Bank is going to be short-lived. Jackson will veto it when it comes up again from my man, Henry Clay. I think he was a little bothered still about the whole corrupt bargain thing. The national government does grow stronger, which under Marshall's, watchful eye, it does. Marshall, acting as a federalist, will expand the size of the federal government through a loose constructionist view. As long as the Congress can connect somehow with some express power, they're going to be able to justify their involvement or their jurisdiction. Also, another example of this is like creating and funding a new military branch, which we did after World War II with the Air Force. Did that involve a crap ton of money? A lot of new positions created in the government? Yes, but Congress has the power to do that under other express powers, like creating and funding a military. The national bank debate will continue until, like I said, Jackson does veto it, which earns him the title of King Jackson. Here's a big one though, if I were you. This is usually referred to as the era of good feeling. But this creates political division. You have the Democratic Party that is going to arise. And followed the view once held by Jefferson that you can read there. The Constitution allows only the means which are considered necessary, not those which are merely convenient. Jefferson saw the bank as convenient and not constitutional. Democrats will want more power for state governments, right? Which is evidenced by the fact that the Democratic Party has such a solid control of the South leading up to the Civil War and after the Civil War. It's the Whigs, led by, you can guess, Henry Clay, that support the bank and support strengthening the national government and believe that the national government having more power over the states will better the states later on because the nation will benefit. And the states, the nation is serving the people, okay? It's not there to serve the states, it's there to serve the people in those states. Yes, honey? Oh, that's a typo. Thanks, Riley. No, the Democrats want to strengthen state governments. Thank you so much. Everybody at home, look at that typo. The Democrats oppose the bank. They want to weaken the national government, strengthen the state governments. Thank you, sweetie. Way to go, Riley Elliott. Guys, Congress will use this same justification to create the Federal Reserve during Wilson's presidency, just FYI. Okay? And tensions over federalism continue into today. All right, I'm going to be nice to you. For similar cases, I just want you to write the first one you're going to see, all right? I know it's a lot. You do not need to write everything. No, no. Okay. A similar case that I would know if I were you that connects to this case is Gibbons versus Ogden. And why don't you let me tell you about it before you write anything down? Because I really think we just need to get the bare bones here. New York had granted Aaron Ogden a license to operate his steamboat ferry business between New York and New Jersey. So New York granted him that, okay? Gibbons, under a license from the federal government, operated steamboats on the same route. So Ogden said, hey, New York gave me the opportunity to be here, so you need to get out. And in the New York court, who gave Ogden the license, they ruled in favor of him. Gibbons argued, but Congress should be able to determine this, as this involves interstate commerce. Why interstate? New York and New Jersey, 2 states, very good. All right. The decision was unanimous for Gibbons. So already a similarity is a unanimous decision, strengthening the federal government from a clause in Article 1. New York, trying to give Ogden a monopoly, violated the Federal Licensing Act of 1793, which said if it involved interstate waterway travel, the federal government was supreme. So just like McCulloch, this case involves which one? Be careful here. Is it the necessary and proper clause, or is it the supremacy clause? Supremacy, very good. And unlike McCulloch, this is not necessary and proper. Which clause is this? Starts with a C. Commerce clause. Good job, Noah. Okay. And if you want to read about Printz versus the United States, which involves the Brady Bill and background checks, you can. That was actually a decision that did curtail the power of the federal government under the necessary and proper clause. It was a 5-4 too. You know how I feel about 5-4s. All right, so you can pause this and you can learn more about those. Does anybody have a question? Okay. Here's your devices to remember. So McCulloch versus Maryland. Come on, Maryland. You can't do that. Maybe. We'll try. And then there's your Winnie the Pooh. As the federal government, it says, I love honey, but you know what I don't love? A state government taxing my bank branch. And then Winnie the Pooh looks very mad, very mad. And then there is our buddy, Drake, who we see in so many. Maryland not being able to tax the national bank after the ruling, and the Supreme Court deciding Congress has the power to make a national bank. That is Drake, right? Yeah. No? Okay, good job, folks. Let me stop the recording. All right, folks at home, you can send me a message if you have a question about what you just saw.